Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Barnett from Christie Digital Systems. Christie is a global audiovisual solutions company, and we create innovative AV solutions and display products that inspire exceptional experiences. And I will be your moderator for this session today. And the CineSparks webinar series is really proud to have been created for emerging filmmakers, screenwriters, cinematographers, and engineers, and really anyone who's new to cinema and moving pictures. We organize this webinar series to talk about current and future trends and the skills that you may need in this industry. If you're pursuing a career in cinema and moving pictures, you're in the right place. Our aim is to help guide your decisions in your roles today and into the future. I wish you all a very big welcome. And before jumping into our session, there's just a few tips that I have about this webinar. So before we get started, the webinar will be recorded. Please use the chat area that you can see on your screen to talk amongst yourselves. And if you have a question, use the Q&A panel to ask questions of the speaker. We'll answer as many of your questions as we can in the last 10 or 15 minutes of this webinar. And if you like this webinar, please share the series with your friends and colleagues on social media by tagging @ChristieDigital and hashtag CineSparks. And before I introduce our guest today, a little bit about who I am. Again, my name is Chris Barnett, and I've been with Christie Digital for 1 year and 16 days, 11 hours and 2 minutes, and it's been absolutely incredible. The organization employs some of the most talented and driven individuals I've ever met, and the culture here is just simply amazing. My love and passion for virtual production stems from my experience in China. I ran a virtual production broadcast studio for PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was a green screen studio, a live studio and live to tape, where I was working with Unreal and Unity artists and developers to create virtual experiences and environments for broadcast and for AR. During this time, I had the pleasure of visiting Jaunt VR's office in Shanghai, where I was given a VR headset for the first time, and I was teleported to a different space, place, and time, multiples of them. And it was mind-bending. And it changed the course and trajectory of my professional life. From that moment until now, I've tirelessly immersed myself in R&D, trying to discover ways to make these impactful experiences more accessible and higher fidelity. Studying pioneers such as Jules Urbach and Paul Debevec, exploring light fields, voxels, and paths to recreate reality digitally. Back then, the only resources to learn Unreal or how to create in 3D was to build a user interface for your video game or to make a donut. And sheesh, the learning curve was very steep, which is why I'm really excited to host today's webinar with Ed Dawson-Taylor of CG Pro School, a school that makes learning the art of virtual production accessible. But I'll introduce him formally in a moment. And first, a little bit more about Christie. Christie Digital Systems has been in the cinema industry for 65 years. And as part of the community, it's important for us to share knowledge and expertise, and that is the reason why we created Christie Ignite, a program to nurture the next generation of cinema professionals. The CineSparks webinar series is a part of that, and I'm delighted to introduce you now to the co-founder and head of technology at CG Pro, Ed Dawson-Taylor. Hey, Ed.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
Doing great.
It's good to see you.
Yeah. How are you?
Good. I'm going to introduce you real briefly. As a digital artist and virtual production supervisor, programmer, and magician in movies, television, and interactive and immersive experiences, Ed has worked across multiple disciplines, widely recognized as a cutting-edge technologist and a master of the creative content process. Ed has led teams of artists and developers to innovate digital creative pipelines and tools that resulted in the amazing and memorable scenes found in Jurassic World, The Lion King, and Jungle Book, amongst others, all of which were groundbreaking and massively successful. His role was to enhance CG software and, I dare say, create new pipelines that gave birth to what we now know as virtual production. Ed prides himself on being a generalist, but that term does not do his experience and expertise justice, in my opinion, as he really is a pioneer in the world of virtual production. His experience with Lion King is really special, and I hope we have time for him to tell that story. about Unreal Engine's evolution stemming from the work he did on that film. Ed co-founded the school CG Pro with his partner Jackie, who is also a technologist and artist in her own right, working on films such as Harry Potter. And the CG Pro School creates and teaches live dynamic courses focused on Unreal Engine, visual effects tools, and the emerging world of virtual production. Ed also runs Edge Visual Studios, a cutting-edge and highly creative real-time facility. He is also co-founder of the nonprofit CG Empowers, which helps underserved communities gain access to the skills needed to thrive in the content creation industry. Ed is also a father, a mentor, and a friend. We met one fateful day online when I heard about this opportunity to learn Unreal Engine through a virtual production community group on Facebook. And I was lucky to be one of the first few courses that Ed taught, and immediately fell in love with Ed and Jackie and the community they were building around learning the art form of virtual production. I've made lifelong friends through the community they've built at CG Pro and continued to learn and grow from it. And you can too. They have an incredible online community that you can join. One is called the Inner Circle that I highly recommend if you want to get your feet wet and you're curious to find out more and you want to be inspired. Thanks for joining us today, Ed.
Thank you, Chris. Lovely introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Great to be here.
All true. So today, we're excited to hear about the most practical AI tools and virtual production applications that are completely reshaping the landscape of filmmaking and empowering filmmakers to elevate their creative process, and so much more. So without further ado, let's get started. Ed, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got started in the business? Looking back, we're really wanting to learn about some of the most important lessons that you've learned that our audience could take away with them today.
Sure. Yeah. How far you want to go back? Well, so literally when I was a small child, I got to experience computer graphics, and it lit me up from the age of, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years old. But it was very rudimentary back then. I had to program all of it. It was really simple programming, and you had to code every pixel. I got to do a computer science degree when I got to kind of college age. Jurassic Park was really the movie that inspired me to want to do computer graphics. That was kind of the moment for many, I know, but certainly for me, and other influences as well. The computer science degree was kind of it was a very important moment because I was very interested in the technology side of things as well as the art side of things. And doing that, I got exposure to, we were just talking about it before the show, to silicon graphics machines and Maya and things that at that point in time weren't accessible to the public. They weren't available. It's not like it is today. Back then, it was not. The machinery was very expensive. The software was very expensive. So that experience really helped me understand what's possible, because I wouldn't have had exposure to that had I not been in that college at Bristol University. And actually, somebody you mentioned in your introduction, Paul Debevec, came and did a lecture at my college in, must have been 99, 2000. And that, I remember that moment being really inspiring. It was around his work on the Matrix movie and developing some of the technologies around photogrammetry and HDR and those kinds of things. And I was really fascinated by that work and those advances. And I actually, it's crazy, last week I got to do a keynote in New York. And it was the one right before his. So it was really kind of incredible full circle to be able to kind of be the warm-up act, if you like, for Paul. And but that moment was very inspiring. The computer science degree was very important. I got to learn the background of how computers work to a probably more depth than I needed to be able to do computer graphics. But I actually became a software engineer for a bit, because I thought getting into computer graphics was, I don't know, I didn't have that much confidence when I was younger, and I just thought that I wouldn't make it in computer graphics for some reason. Don't feel like that anymore, but back then I didn't have that kind of confidence, or sure what's the right word? I didn't have didn't have the self-confidence, the self-esteem, or the clarity, or the direction, or the any of that kind of stuff, which is why we try and put so much of that into our community. Because I realized that even with the skills, without all of that, it doesn't matter. You need 50% at least of each to make it and get towards your goals. So, and that's something which I actively worked on throughout the years as well, working on things outside of computer graphics. But really, the computer science degree, becoming a software engineer, doing CG as a hobby. I was a VJ, and I did basically, it was experimenting, with Maya and making animations, and being a VJ was so cool because I was like, I was London in the 90s, so I was in the kind of the rave scene back then, and it was very exciting, and I got to just have an outlet for the art that I was making, the weird experimental art that I was making. And that was really important, again, to the community point, because being in that community and being with my friend Ollie, we formed a VJ duo called Dynamite Fishing, and we used to do visuals in some clubs and did stuff at like Fabric and some pretty cool clubs, mainly our friends' club nights. But that was a really good testing ground to be able to release things and have people see them and have a sort of deadline-ish of a thing to work on. And having that hobby and the computer science degree, programming career kind of built together to a kind of moment of existential crisis in myself, when I realized I wanted to really pursue computer graphics professionally and go for full-on pro visual effects. And I did some training. I went back to a school, did a short course, a place called Escape in London, and about 18 years ago. It was really near the beginning of that school. And that really helped me get into visual effects, and I learned Maya thoroughly at that school, and jumped into visual effects, and then spent years since then honing the skills and rolling with all the changes in the industry, and just continuing to learn and love computer graphics and do all sorts of different things since then, which I've worked in movies, commercials, music videos, interactive, car companies, race car championships, VR, theme park work, all sorts of different stuff, which I continue to do. And I could probably say a lot more, but that's the short version, I guess. And towards the end, another thing I'll mention is the point that you brought up around the virtual production movies. And I was at Digital Domain and got the opportunity to go work on Jungle Book, which actually most people turned down at the time because it was kind of this strange experiment of a way of making a movie, and it wasn't visual effects, and it wasn't quite previs. And I thought it sounded interesting, and I'm very glad that I thought that, because I got to go work on that movie, and that paved the way for The Lion King, and then some of those advances, which were really bringing old techniques back from the 1930s, involving projection and visual effects and optical effects, and just really advancing them through some technological leaps to the point where people could make movies and pre-visualize movies and work together more collectively. And that was such a light bulb moment for me to see people working in that way, that it really paved the way for wanting to start CG Pro, because I realized that nobody out there could have access to it at the time, because Unreal hadn't built the tools into itself yet. And the only way you could do it was have $300 million and be able to hire these big companies. And I wanted to do something about that. And me and my wife, Jackie, wanted to once it was grounded into Unreal enough, we wanted to be able to kind of get this out to more people. And that's been one of the greatest joys of my career so far, has been being able to work with other people and their dreams. And I've been lucky to achieve some of my own childhood dreams, and still working on some more of them. But now like, it brings me greater joy than I've ever known to help other people go after theirs.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and you tell it well. If people were listening today to this, would you recommend that they also pursue a computer science degree and go down that road if they're looking to get into cinema and visual effects and virtual production?
Uh, I don't know. It depends. I mean, I'm not sure even if I would recommend it to myself, but I mean, yes and no. It depends on who you are, what you're doing, and what your outcome is. I think for me, retraining when I did in my 20s, um, to have a career change, go from software engineering to visual effects, I didn't want to go back and do a degree at that point. It was more time and more money and more everything that I was willing to put into that transition, and I felt like it was unnecessary. And now there's schools um, that do work with people in shorter periods of time, like ours. We've really modeled it after people like me wanting to make those transitions. I don't know that it's entirely necessary, although I will say that the computer science degree for me was very it exposed me to things that I probably wouldn't have pushed myself through had I not been in that environment. And while they were probably overkill in some ways, it did teach me very thoroughly about how computers work. I know that that's shifting and changing, but even more importantly than that, I think what it gave me was a really good sense of problem solving and the engineering mindset and the understanding of how to break down very complicated problems into small problems that are easier to solve. And I think that's probably one of the greatest skills that you can have as an artist, an engineer, or anything in particular, because the thing that gets in the way of people accomplishing big goals mostly is, number one, the clarity of the goal. That's the one thing I see people stumbling on the most, weirdly, is they think they're sure of the goal, but they're really not. The other one is really the complexity of it, and having that kind of confidence to go after it. And the complexity can get in the way of that. So being able to look at something that's very lofty or highly complicated or a big problem can put you off. But if you break it down into lots of small things, then it's solvable. It's very solvable. And I think that's that sort of mindset, I think, regardless of all the technology change in between, was very important. And computers today still work the same way that they did then. And we haven't quite cracked quantum yet. No, the computers are still pretty much fundamentally working the same way they did as I learned from that degree. I think the two in the pursuit of visual effects or virtual production or something with computer graphics and entertainment, or not entertainment, if you want to go after that type of work, the two things that are the strongest skills to have are on the tech side and on the creative side. And on the technology side, computer science is probably the best kind of way of understanding that deeply. If you get down to the level of math or even voltage and the electronics side of it, you get it more than you need to, and it really unlocks the ability to do things that other people can't do. And that's been so while it might not be entirely necessary to do, it's been one of my strongest suits in some ways, because it's something that not that many other people have in the creative fields, and it's kind of a differentiator. It's an advantage. It's something that means you can make tools do things that they can't. So I will say that it's not 100% necessary, but it has been one of the best things that I ever did. And I'm not sure I'd go through 4 years of study again at this point, but it helped me be able to a good example of what can do you well in life, I think, is if you're doing something that you love to do, that people find valuable and that you're good at. And I was quite good at computer science. There are other people that were better than me, and I was quite good at art. There are other people who are better than me at that too. But the combination of the two together has been kind of the magic, I think. And being able to be in teams where I could, if you're really productive as a person, then people want to hire you. if you are really productive and you make other people productive, like you can make tools that make a team productive, then people really want to hire you, and that's when you can get more and more opportunities. And also, if you love the work, which I do, I still love coding, even though I don't do it as much as I used to. So it just unlocks a lot of things that I think if you're willing to grind through that, the work that it takes to get to know that stuff well, and actually the fundamentals of it really well, it's very worth it. But I think it's hard, and you got to want it. And it's the same's true on the art side as well.
Thank you for all of that. I want to dial it back to being a VJ. What kind of software were you using to create visuals, while you were doing that kind of work?
Yeah. Well, I started off experimenting with 3D tools. The first 3D I ever did, I will note, was not in a 3D tool or DCC. So it wasn't in software. It was in a text editor. It was an exercise we had to do at our in my degree, where we had to model our lecture theatre, and we actually modeled it in a text editor. So that really gave me an understanding of how, like going back to the computer science, how 3D is constructed, because I literally had to plot all the points of all the tables and everything in that room in text in a notepad, effective as Emacs on Solaris. But then we had to render it through a ray tracer, and we had to place where the camera was with numbers, and we had to match a photograph that had been taken with a kind of old crusty camera. And the mark that we got for the project was how exactly the render matched the photograph, like overlaid on top of each other. It was extremely difficult. Unfortunately, we have tools now that we don't have to do that anymore. But that's how it began. I then started digging into Maya, and started off originally with 3D Studio Max, but Maya, because I learned that people in visual effects used Maya, and so I thought I need to get better at that. And so I really dug into Maya initially and wanted to get very good at that. On the VJ side, really, I used a program called Visual Jockey, or VJO, which was a kind of, I used Resolume a little bit, and then later on a little bit of Touch Designer. But VJO was like a really early kind of node-based visual development environment, so it made it very interactive. And one of the cool things about it is you could hook in all sorts of different controls into the system. So I found some early on, like some wireless game controllers, and I found out I could connect them to the node tree, and then have transitions be triggered by sliders and buttons on the controller. And I could go go out into the audience and not be stuck behind in the little booth. I could go out and walk around, and then like kind of freak people out by giving them the controller and letting them play with the visuals on the screen. And that was tons of fun. But yeah, all sorts of different software. I mean, that's kind of been the case throughout my careers, I guess.
That's a really good lead in to the next question, which is, how has the creative process shifted and advanced over the last 5 years? Providing examples from your experience.
Sure. The last 5 years, I mean, I guess like fundamentally depends on how you define the creative process, I guess. But the essence of creativity is, for me, and also a few other people like Einstein, is combinatorial play, is what Einstein called creativity. And that's really putting things together in novel ways, putting things together in ways that they haven't been before, not necessarily radically inventing new components every single time, but putting them together in new ways. Even going back to there's a great book I read on creativity. I think it's called Creativity. I'll have to try and find a link to it or something, but it goes back to creativity on the molecular level, like how things at that level bump into each other and combine and form new atoms, combine and form new molecules. And at that point, we're really combining things together in new ways. If the creative process is that, then it's always changing. But fundamentally, I think it's just about the willingness to be able to try things in a different way. And I think over the last 5 years, we've probably seen more of that. Visual effects, the visual effects pipeline, which is where I've spent a lot of my second career, had got figured out to a great extent. There's still a lot of innovation going on in it, but a lot of things like modeling and lighting and rigging and those kinds of things had been figured out, and they were solving much smaller bits of detailed problems. But the big stuff had kind of been worked out, and I think the big innovations coming in that are causing lots of change to the creative process in the last 5 years, I think, have really been the advent of using real-time technologies together, and now all this AI stuff that people are talking about. Those are not new things. The concepts there are all things that have been around for quite some time. Arguably AI, which is mostly machine learning, the stuff that we're seeing at the moment is something that's I studied in college, when I was back in college in the 90s. So it's not new. It's just got to a maturity at this point where the hardware and programming together have got to a kind of maturity where they're useful to lots of people, and they're not just in the kind of research labs where I saw it back then. But they've been around for a long time, and as has real-time CG. It just got a lot better over the years, and the hardware's got a lot better. And so I guess the genesis of movies like Jungle Book and Lion King were those technologies coming to a certain level of maturity at exactly the right moment, where it met a team of people that were willing to gamble on trying to make a movie in that way. And having some of the kind of executive team and Jon Favreau, the director, being willing to place the bet on that being possible and willing to put a big chunk of money behind it, has really helped prove that it's possible. And the evolution going from movies like Lord of the Rings, where there was VCAM, and Avatar, where there was a lot more, and then into Jungle Book and through Lion King and into The Mandalorian, seeing all of these technologies come together, from mocap and game engines and rear projection or LED. All those things are not new, but they've all come together in a new way, and they've all and the faith that those people had in putting that much money together and having that experiment, I guess, has birthed the whole kind of movement. So it's really lucky to be there in those moments and see it being born, and seeing it shift the creative process for many people. Now, there's so much that gets talked about now that is the LED volume and all about getting in-camera visual effects, and a lot of what I've worked on is also in the previs area, where you're trying to figure out how to do something in rough before you go and do it in the kind of expensive and more fixed way later on in post-production, if you like. And in that, I think it's changed the creative process tremendously, being able to see filmmakers like that given tools that they can literally play with, unlocked for me what looked like, anyway, because I was familiar with the traditional previs method of directors standing behind you and directing you, being on a computer to do what they want to see, but they're not actually connected to it physically. Seeing them actually be connected to it, being able to pick up cameras, being able to be in a set that they're comfortable with, that and watch them play in that mode, unlocked a new level of creativity, I think, and then being able to literally just try things, experiment with things. You can't do that so much when you're doing in-camera visual effects, because you have to figure everything out before you get there, because you can't throw things around quite as wildly when you're on a proper shoot. But doing a kind of previs shoot, like some of those movies were, tremendously freeing to people. It's very it means you can try things a lot more and be willing to fail at them. And I think that's where, in essence, the creative process, coming back to that point, is best served, because creativity needs the ability to try things, fail at them, iterate, not judge the failure, learn from it, and just be willing to stumble and to experiment. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck in the filmmaking process, in being kind of fixed about how it's done. And I've seen this kind of blow that open, where people kind of realize the greater value of it. And I think I think there's so much value for it in previs that the more I can shine a light on that, because the LED wall shines a light on itself, literally, pun intended. It doesn't need it, it looks cool, everyone wants it, and I get it. But in the previs end of things, I think there's just huge amounts of value in the creative process itself.
Well said, and thank you for broaching the topic. In terms of AI, can you elaborate a little bit more about where it is today and help in its most helpful ways, helping the process now, and then what should we be looking forward to, right, in the future?
Well, I'll take a stab at it for sure. Not very good at predicting the future, but and nobody is. But some people like to say that they can. I don't think anyone can. But I'll take a crack at say what might be useful to pay attention to, and then where I think it might be leading. So in terms of AI, again, mostly machine learning and neural nets, and there's a huge amount of excitement about it, because we're all seeing those videos out there from Sora and Kling and Flux, and some of these new tools that are seemingly able to make very high fidelity looking video with just a few words, which is it's very, very powerful, and I think suggests a future which a lot of people are excited about, a lot of people are concerned about. And before I say anything about it, I'll say that I'm definitely not here to condemn or condone AI, but I will say that I think people need to understand it and keep up with it, and also understand where it's useful, where it's not, where it's responsible, and where it's not, and really look into that for themselves and find their own way with that. I'll say some stuff about what I'm seeing and my opinions on it from a sort of engineering but more an artist perspective, because I think that's probably more relatable, more useful. So what is it? Why are we all excited about it in the first place? I think because we're lazy, ultimately. Because we want to make, and which is a good thing. Engineers are the ultimate lazy people. We want to make things more efficient. We want to make things more automated, easier, more things that are possible that weren't possible before. All of which are noble pursuits. I think so this is suggesting that we can make all kinds of things very quickly and and things we couldn't make before. So all of that seems to be unlocked by using various different AI tools. I think there's two different versions of it. There's one which is have an idea and just kind of express the idea, and then have the black box, have the computer make the idea for you. And then there is having it help you with bits of the process that you're familiar with already. So injecting AI into the existing creative process. I think, again, and the machine learning neural nets are kind of creative. They're combining things in novel ways. So essentially they are creating things. How they work is, I think, very misunderstood, and what they're capable of, I think, is also a bit misunderstood. And also the creative process, I think, is often misunderstood. So why would we want to use it? We would want to use it if we want to make something more efficiently, if we would want to make something that hasn't been made before. And being in visual effects is really all about trying to make things that haven't been made before, realizing the fantastical. Like the reason why I fell in love with it in the first place is because you could make your imagination appear, and there's very few ways that you can really do that other than computer graphics, and make something that's just an idea in your head appear for real. And when I first was able to do that, I totally fell in love with it. And I think this is suggesting that more people can have access to that, because the skills I had to learn over the time period I have been quite difficult and time consuming, and that therefore prohibitive to many. But the future of using these tools suggests that more people are going to have access to being able to realize things that are fantastical, which is great. I think it's important to look at the reason for making something in the first place. I think what we're seeing a lot of at the moment with AI is a lot of novelty, and people making something and saying it's cool, and it is, and that's great. And I'm not I don't want to put down the excitement over it, because it is cool, and it is making things that are undeniably cool. I think that art is something that is an inherently human expression, and therefore I think that people, that it's a way of people expressing themselves. It is important, I think, to remember why we make art in the first place. There's not just to be content that fills slots in a streaming channel. It is because people need to. It's because people want to, and tools exist to help people create art, and they always have, and they always will. And if they help people to express themselves, then I think that's fine. That's great. I kind of look forward to the moment when all of this settles a little bit and people can, the novelty wears off. I'm looking forward to the novelty wearing off, because it's not like wishing the excitement away of this moment that we're birthing this thing, but for the moment where the novelty wears off, so that all the people who really truly have something to say and want to express something are the ones that remain. In terms of learning, sorry, that was like possibly a bit esoteric. I'll try and make it a bit more practical in terms of what I think people can learn. That you can see things that make pictures, things that make videos, things that use text as an input, things that are starting to use imagery as an input, things that use 3D scenes as an input. From what is out there as a narrative, it suggests that prompt engineering is the way to use AI. And I think in the arts, it's not entirely the case. That I think it's just the same as talking to a group of artists and just using words. It's a very, very bad way of trying to make something visual, to just talk about it. And now we're starting to see some of these tools ingest other things like imagery and other inputs. I think it's now getting to the point where we're realizing that it is something that assists. It's not necessarily something that's just going to make movies by itself. And the reason we're saying all of that in the first place, I think, is to say that what I think is important for people to focus on is the traditional stuff more than ever, because I do believe that we still want to tell stories, and if we do, we want to be specific about how we do it. And artists are the ultimate control freaks at the end of the day, and what a lot of the kind of straight text to anything misses is the control element, being able to control what the output is. And we really need to be able to do that if we want to tell the specific stories that we're trying to tell. And for that reason, I think we still need to work on the traditional pursuits of being able to understand composition and drawing and 3D and camera and storytelling. And all of those things are probably more important than ever. But some of the tools are advancing rapidly, and I would certainly not ignore them and hope that they're going away. They probably aren't. Being responsible with them for sure, but I don't know if that answered the question. Just
It does, yeah, and it even answered my follow-up. So thank you. My follow-up was, what kind of skills are important in order to, leverage and lean into this changing landscape that AI is bringing to us today, and you nailed it. Reference is one of the greatest lessons that you taught me, and that the Epic Fellowship taught me, is the value of reference, and I believe that that is also going to come into a strong play in AI, like as you alluded to. Not just language, right? But imagery, reference of images. So, an extension of that, though, is what skills are strong to have right now, right? Which ones do film graduates lack coming out of film school or cinematography school or design school? I know I can speak to this because of the gaps that I had coming out of school and that were filled by CG Pro, but I'd like to hear you speak to that.
Sure, yeah. So I think, there's one thing which is starting out fresh and haven't done much yet versus been in the industry already and have learned a bunch of stuff and are looking to kind of transition through this changing time. In terms of people coming out of schools or starting out, I think, again, what's and just generally across all of those, what's useful right now is still, I think, what has been useful for the last 20 years or last 100 years, which is really good, solid fundamentals. And going back to the first thing I think I said about my computer science degree, which was maybe overkill for a visual effects artist, but has paid off over the course of my career tremendously in being able to understand in depth how computers work. So I think, and if that's a fundamental, then I think that's proved itself to be valuable in so many ways. And then on the art side, learning to draw, doing lots of life drawing and things like that to really develop an eye and develop as an artist, which is really about more about your eye than it is about how well you can use Unreal Engine. That you can then learn tools fairly quickly. Going to the Jurassic World, where I had to start doing shots very quickly after jumping in there as a freelancer working there, and I had 3 days to do some tutorials on their proprietary software Xeno, which you can't learn if you're not at ILM. I had 3 days to learn it, and then had a producer chasing after me. That's something which happens. You have to learn a tool really quick, and that's where really the fundamentals kick in. If you know how 3D works fundamentally, you can jump between pieces of software. If you know how programming works fundamentally, you can jump between programming languages fairly easily. If you know how art works, which is a weird thing to say, but if you understand what makes good imagery, and you understand how pictures are formed and how they work and what they communicate and why, then you can use all sorts of different tools from Photoshop to 3D programs. So I think really grounding yourself on the art side, and if you end up being a sort of technical artist, which is, I guess, a bunch of what I've done, learning the fundamentals of each side of that, I think, would be like life drawing and computer science. If you do those two things really well, you'll get the fundamentals of what's going on, and you'll be able to learn the higher level tools on top of that, things like Unreal Engine or Maya or whatever, much more easily. That I think that right now there's things out there being said like, you don't need to learn programming, or there's no point in learning visual effects because now AI is here, and stuff like that, which are very, very kind of throwaway and biased opinions, in my opinion, I personally see all of the change that's happening as being stuff that's here to stay, and in some ways more radical than I've seen in my whole career, some of the advances. But I think it still comes back to just getting really, really good at the fundamentals again, and then learning how these tools can help. And then particularly with real time and AI, I guess are the two bigger areas of innovation, seeing where Unreal Engine has got to with the the being in Seattle and seeing them release 5.5 with mega lights, and just seeing how far they're pushing the technology of a game engine and how visually stunning it looks. Now, for anyone who's got Unreal Engine, highly recommend getting the free for the month assets. The Cambodia temple ruin in there is just stunning, and it's free right now. Being able to see what that's capable of is incredible. Seeing things like Chaos Group releasing, or not released yet, but working on Project Arena on Vantage and making real-time ray tracing, full-frame ray tracing available. They've now shot a short film that's proved that you can use it on LED walls, and then seeing some of the advances in machine learning, and Paul Debevec's work continues in that area, and in lighting, and seeing all of the advances in machine learning. That's where all the significant innovations going on, and the tools are adapting and incorporating. With AI specifically, there's many people who are just straight up not allowing its use in final imagery. Like, you can't necessarily use it if it's going to end up in a movie as a pixel in a movie. But people are using it to generate concept, or gather reference, if you like, or make new reference. And that's sort of in the previs department, where I think probably has its most value at the moment. And it's still really struggling with the two fundamentals of copyright and control. Controlling it is evolving and getting better, but it's still quite difficult, and it's still quite hard to wield as an artist and make something that's predictable, that's actually what you want, that's good quality. That's not really here yet entirely. And then the copyright problem is a big one. We can't just sidestep copyright just because we feel like it. That's being wrestled with in the courts right now, and so we don't entirely really know where all of that's going and where it's going to settle. But keeping an eye on it, learning it, using it where it is responsible, and understanding how it can be useful, because there is quite a lot to learn in it, and I think it's important to keep up. So I would say, if anyone's interested in learning 3D, still learn it, because I think it will still be an input to these machines. And the visual effects is, the industry is going through its own sort of wobble, maybe is the right way to say it. Like, how do we make this stuff? How do we distribute it? How do we do all of those things? That's all kind of up in the air a little bit at the moment, and it's causing stress and problems. And I think one of the things I'll say, which I say whenever I can, is learning some of the tools that you can use in visual effects. Even though the industry is going through some challenges right now, you can use those same skills in all kinds of other different industries. My last job I had was an autonomous electric race car championship. It wasn't in movies, and it was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had. It was just tremendously innovative and very creative, and used Unreal Engine and Houdini and all the things that I was using on the movies prior to that. So there's lots of opportunity in other fields, and I think being part of the cutting edge, is being part of the change, is a great place to be. But if you're wanting to learn skills and jump in, and you're scared because they're changing so much, I wouldn't be quite as scared. I would just really double down on the fundamentals of each part of the creativity, the technical, and then just keep up with the AI as much as you can.
Thank you, Ed. We're reaching an end to this webinar, and I want to leave the last 10 minutes for Q&A. I did have one more question about the importance of network, which I know you have developed an amazing community at CG Pro that I find to be a highly valuable network But we're going to, record your answer about that and publish it as an aftermath to this webinar, because it's really important that people getting into the industry or exploring the industry or curious about it know where to access these networks and to get industry, experience through experts that have already done it. And you've done a phenomenal job developing that on your Facebook channels and online. And so we'll be sure to plug that with a post after the webinar. But to the questions. Question 1 comes in as, how was the transition between visual effects live action to real-time virtual projection? It must have been production, but I like the term. How did you wrap your head around the idea on the technical side with Unreal compared to Maya?
Well, firstly, it was Unity as opposed to Unreal, because Unreal hadn't matured at that point, and neither had Unity, but they just chose Unity as being the container, because either one of them could have been the container, really. All the tools that we have now for filmmaking in Unreal did not exist at that moment. So they built them, and they evolved through Unity originally, and then Unreal just gave them that kind of permanent home. Again, it comes back to the good solid fundamentals, like knowing how 3D works, knowing how technology works, knowing how imagery works, allows you to jump more easily between packages. And I've had to jump between programming languages before, between 3D software before. If you understand fundamentally what a polygon is, then it means the same thing in 2 different programs, and anything that uses polygons becomes fairly straightforward if you dig down to that level and you learn kind of a bit more than you need to do a thing and learn actually how it works fundamentally. Then those kinds of transitions become not easy, but like much easier if you focus more on the tool itself, like where things are in menus. And I see people get frustrated, like, oh, where's this thing gone? It's moved. Really, you could reach in there and program it yourself if you had to. And if you get to that point where you can, which is not for everybody, I understand, but if you can, then you don't fret so much when it's moved in the menu, or it becomes easier to find because you understand how the engineer that made that thing thinks and where they might have moved it to. I don't know. So the transition between visual effects and virtual production for me was fun, because I'm a very curious person, and I was in a wonderful moment of just excitement. There was an empty warehouse with a bunch of chairs and no power and no computers, and we started from scratch, literally. So we all had to kind of figure it out together. So in the other sense, nobody knew how to do it, so that kind of helped in me not knowing how to do it, because kind of nobody knew how to do it. So there was no judgment from the environment there, and we all had to kind of work it out together.
And then the second question that came through was, for a young graphic designer starting out in Blender right now, could you recommend a 3D visual effects skill development path?
Sure. Well, if a person asks that question is able to suggest or say where they want to get to in the end, a path comes from knowing where you are right now and where you want to get to. So, and there's multiple things that you can do, many things you can do with these tools at the end, and you don't have to necessarily think that, okay, that goal or that end point is for the rest of my life, like people are pressured into when they're 16, or like choose your eternity kind of thing. Life's not like that. You can change your mind, do different things, but it is important to have a point that you want to get to when you're setting out on a journey. Like when they set out to find India, they ended up finding the West Indies, went totally the wrong way, but they wouldn't have got out the front door if they hadn't have had a goal. It's important to have that goal so that you can build a path, because essentially achieving goals is easy. when you have the clarity of the goal. And the thing I said earlier about the number one reason being why people don't accomplish goals is because they either don't have a goal, or they have a goal and it's not their goal, it's somebody else's goal, or they have a goal and it's not clear enough. If you have a clarity on the goal, like real clarity, and that really only comes through experimentation and trying things and talking to people and making a best guess and going for it, course correcting on the way, and figuring out whether is that still the thing I want, being really honest with yourself. Like, I wanted to become an animator because I saw animation happening, and it turns out that eventually, after 8 years of torturing myself to try and become the world's best animator and not succeeding and feeling bad about it, and I turns out I don't entirely love the process of character animation. I like a lot of other things, and I can do character animation, but it's not my greatest love, and therefore I wasn't really putting the time into it, if I was really being honest. And so having that clarity about that goal comes from experience, it comes from trying, it comes from being honest with yourself and adjusting. And then if you got the end point, or what you think is the end point, all you got to do is go find somebody who's already got there, ask them exactly how they got there, and then they will tell you the path. And I could tell you a whole bunch of paths right now, but that is when I wanted to get into visual effects. I went and talked to all the studios, said, what do you use? They said Maya. I went and learned Maya, got a job in Maya. There was more steps, but it becomes that simple. Most people are taking the wrong actions. They don't have the right goal, or they're taking the wrong actions towards that goal, or they're not being consistent enough with their actions towards that goal. In terms of learning Blender, I would learn as I said, all the fundamentals that you can. If you want to be a generalist, try and get really good modeling, and particularly lighting these days. You don't have to get good at everything, but those two things modeling, texturing, and lighting will stand you in very good stead, I think, no matter what, and they will persist for quite some time, despite all the AI hype. Hope that helped.
Thank you, Ed. And we're going to have to wrap. We have more questions in the can, but we're going to answer those after this webinar and then post them so that everyone has their questions answered.
Can I just say one quick
yeah,
thing, because you
sure.
mentioned it already, and as we're live, I promise I won't take 45 minutes. You mentioned the inner circle, and just as we're live, before we're wrapping, and thank you for sharing the links. This is the kind of stuff that we do in the inner circle at CG Pro. It's a subscription group, and we're there to help people with their technical problems, their creative problems, and their industry problems. That's really what that's about, as opposed to the courses that we do that are longer and about training specific skill sets. That group is all about helping people get to their goals, and it's much more flexible and meets much more regularly. And I'm in it all the time. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I'm in it all the time too, and it's really a source of inspiration for me, and helps unblock me when I get blocked on certain challenges. And it's also a good place to make friends.